Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 7 years ago, this NDP government promised to make life more affordable. And 18 months ago, this Premier specifically said we'd have results that people could see, feel, and experience in their daily lives. Well, the results are in. And today, we discovered that those promises are nothing more than empty words as we face the highest grocery prices in all of Canada. In fact, just in the last 6 months, British Columbians are paying $300 more a month for groceries. And Stephanie Watts, who is a first responder in Metro Vancouver, says, and I quote, "It's exhausting, constantly calculating the cost. It's just not cutting it anymore." End of quote. So my question to the Premier, why is this Premier making the NDP affordability crisis worse for middle-class families like Stephanie's, with relentless increases in the carbon tax driving up the cost of essentials like groceries?
Minister of Energy and Mines.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Well, the truth couldn't be any more different than how the Leader of the Opposition is putting this. Just yesterday, we announced $250 million to help British Columbians save money on their home heating bills with rebates to support the installation of heat pumps. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that understands things are hard for people right now. With the cost of interest rates, the cost of inflation going up, we need to see more supports for people, and that's what this government is focused on. Whether it's reducing the fees for transit, for youth, whether it's adding to the supports that we provide through the BC Family Benefit Bonus, whether it's supporting people make that transition to clean energy, this government is focused on people each and every single day. Mr. Speaker, the other government talks about cuts, what would be cut, what would they cut if they were sitting on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker? I think we know, we've seen that track record before, and we're going to stay focused on supporting people.
Members. Leader of the Official Opposition, supplemental.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that answer just symbolizes how totally out of touch this minister and this government has become. I'll tell you the first thing we'd cut. We'd cut the 60% increase in the food bank lineups that have happened under their watch because of their policies. And remember, Mr. Speaker, it was this NDP Premier who promised tangible results, and all we hear is that kind of empty rhetoric. Daily life in British Columbia, newsflash to the NDP, comes with the highest grocery prices in the country. A simple bag of groceries costing over $73 in Vancouver is 24% more expensive than the very same groceries in Calgary. Chicken breasts for the upcoming barbecue season are $26 per kilogram, the highest in the country and double what they cost in Calgary. That's what people are experiencing every day under this NDP government. And that's probably why Tyson Southcombe from Langley moved to Alberta. And he says, and I quote, "You can't buy anything, especially people at my age, and it gets harder and harder every day," end of quote. So my question is the Premier really surprised that once again, under their NDP government, there is a record exodus of young people leaving British Columbia, packing up and moving to Alberta, where our residents here can't even afford groceries anymore, Mr. Speaker?
Government House Leader.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. And no doubt people are facing some challenges with global inflation, with interest rates going up, Honourable Speaker. The challenge is not only being faced in BC, it's being faced by people across North America. I disagree with the member when he talks about people coming to British Columbia. I think it's important for everybody in this House to note that every 37 days, there's 10,000 net people coming to British Columbia. Every 37 days, 10,000 net. We have not seen this level of migration to British Columbia in the history of this province, Honourable Speaker, because people see opportunity here. They see that we have a strong economy, in fact, the strongest economy in the country. Now, Honourable Speaker, Leader of the Opposition talks about carbon tax, Honourable Speaker. I appreciate they might not want to hear this, but they should hear this. Now, I think it's important to take a trip down memory lane to the evolution of the Leader of the Opposition's view on carbon tax. In 2008, he said, we knew the carbon tax wasn't going to be particularly popular, but I think in politics, at some point, you have to decide whether you're going to try to do the right thing or do the easy thing. Okay, that was 2008. Let's go to 2012, and he said that I think that if people want to believe climate change is an issue, the warming of the planet is an issue, the only sensible way to deal with that, I believe, is carbon pricing. That's the only way you're going to change behavior. And the Leader of the Opposition may say, well, you know what, that was a long time ago, Honourable Speaker. Just last year, he said, if you want people to change behavior, you have to put a cost to it and ask them to consider shifting their behavior, Honourable Speaker. So what has changed between 2008 to 2023, Honourable Speaker? Clearly, he woke up and saw the poll numbers and saw that the BC Conservatives are eating his lunch, Honourable Speaker, but that's a shame, because Gordon Campbell was a leader when it came to addressing climate change, and he's running that legacy into the ground.
Leader of the Official Opposition, second supplemental.
Well, sure. I'm happy to engage in this with the minister. Let's take that trip down memory lane, because, in fact, in 2012, when I was the Minister of Finance, I froze the carbon tax at 6.7 cents a litre, and we kept it frozen for the next 5 years until an unfortunate error allowed them to get back into government. And what did they do? They changed the second part about the carbon tax that was really unfortunate. Instead of making it revenue neutral, where every penny went back to British Columbians, they took it all into government, more than doubled it. Now they want to triple it, and they just increased it 23% on April the 1st. That's their record, Mr. Speaker. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, for individuals like Stephanie and Tyson, they are so far worse off today after 7 years of this NDP promising to make things more affordable. They just tend to forget about the results they actually achieve. Highest housing prices in North America, highest fuel prices in North America, highest rents in the entire country, and highest grocery prices in Canada. That's actually your results. You have to wear those results as a result of the decisions you make. But the other result, Mr. Speaker, I touched on earlier, which is really sad, and that is that we have seen the lineups at food banks increase by 60%. And meanwhile, who are the NDP really helping out? Well, under this Premier, annual payments to management consulting firms have more than doubled, reaching over $220 million last year alone. Since 2018, the NDP has spent $1 billion on consultants. Now, instead of pouring $1 billion into management consulting firms, this Premier, this NDP government could have adopted BC United's plan, eliminate the provincial fuel tax entirely, saving British Columbians 15 cents a litre every time they fill up their car. That would be real significant savings. So my question to the minister, if he's going to start taking these, is a really straightforward one. Can you please explain, after increasing the size of your government by 36%, why you need to spend a further $1 billion on management consultants to deliver the worst results we've ever seen in the country for people like Stephanie and Tyson?
Always through the chair. Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And again, it's a real shame to hear the leader of the BCU party, who was claimed to be a real champion when it came to addressing climate change, talked about it as the greatest legacy that he was part of a previous government. His actual words were, I am actually very proud of the leadership we've taken in the carbon tax. I think if you accept...
Members, let him talk, please. Members, let the minister's floor.
Honourable Speaker, he said, I think that if you accept that climate change is an issue, then pricing carbon is absolutely the right way to deal with it. Honourable Speaker, what the shame of this whole thing is this. Under Gordon Campbell, BC started down a path of...
Members,
Under Gordon Campbell, Honourable Speaker, we started down a path of real climate leadership, Honourable Speaker. And what's a shame about this entire thing is this leader kicked out the person who didn't believe in climate change, didn't even believe it was man-caused, and now is chasing him down a really, really negative place for this province, Honourable Speaker. The BC Conservatives don't believe climate change is real. What I don't understand is, do they believe climate change is real or not?
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Wow, the level of this government not wanting to take responsibility for their failed promises and their failures on all sorts of files is shocking, Mr. Speaker. Let's be clear, under us, carbon tax was capped at $30, emissions were actually going down, and it was revenue neutral. Under this government, it's climbing to $170 a tonne, and emissions are actually going up worse than anywhere else in Canada. This government doesn't know how to implement anything, Mr. Speaker. While the NDP continues to inflate the prices for gas, rent, and groceries through all these record-setting deficits with no end in sight, the only people getting richer are insiders and management consultants who are reaping the rewards. Last year alone, the Premier funneled over $220 million into management consulting firms. This includes hefty payouts like $62 million to Deloitte, $42 million to PwC, enormous sums, Mr. Speaker, of tax dollars that enrich global corporations under this NDP. Rather than the $1 billion on management consulting, the Premier should have adopted actually BC United's plan to reduce the fuel tax by 15 cents a litre. To the Energy Minister, that's what we would cut, the provincial fuel tax. Full stop. Consulting firms are dining out while ordinary British Columbians simply can't afford to eat groceries, Mr. Speaker, after increasing the size of the government by 36%. Why has the Premier spent $1 billion on consultants with no tangible results to show for it?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And again, down this track of carbon tax, I think the member asked the question. He should just maybe look over his right shoulder to see the member from Abbotsford who said, I think people, well, the majority of people had the opportunity to consider the carbon tax in the last election and found it, on balance, to be a positive and progressive initiative. Maybe he can look on the left of him. Maybe he can look on the left of him for the member from Prince George who said, I think people who do want to see environmental leadership in the province, and obviously the carbon tax is one of the best things where British Columbia has led. Honourable Speaker, maybe he can look left a little further at his other colleague. When the BC Conservative Party was actually talking about getting rid of the carbon tax, he said, reducing the carbon tax is a valid thing to say, but you can also explain what services you will cut. Honourable Speaker?
Members.
Honourable Speaker, he said something, he said, it's great you can talk about it, but he'll tell me, what services will you cut to make up for that $5 billion shortfall? Honourable Speaker, I can suggest that the leader of the BCU party here will make cuts, because that's what he did when he was the Minister of Finance in 2012. Cuts to healthcare, cuts to services, Honourable Speaker. People in British Columbia cannot afford the cuts that he will bring to British Columbia.
Kamloops North Thompson supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's pretty obvious that the government House Leader, because they've raised 32 new and increased taxes under their watch, actually can't even get the right tax that we're talking about. We're talking about provincial fuel tax to the minister, not the carbon tax. But the minister doesn't seem to understand the difference, Mr. Speaker. It's a provincially controlled fuel tax of 15 cents a litre that could be removed today, saving British Columbians $1 billion instead of spending $1 billion on consultants. In fact, the Premier's office is already jam-packed with special advisors, yet they're still squandering another $1 billion to have other consultants advise those. I don't even know what this cabinet does with all this shadow cabinet work going on in the Premier's office. Yet as these consultants cash in, British Columbians suffer the worst results ever. Under this government's watch, housing affordability is worst in North America. Grocery prices have skyrocketed 30%. Wait times at walk-in clinics are now the longest in Canada. We're sending patients for cancer treatment down to private hospitals down in Bellingham. BC United would instead, Mr. Speaker, spend that $1 billion on cutting the fuel tax by 15 cents a litre and give people an actual break when they go to the pumps. Why has the NDP poured $1 billion into high-priced consultants while instead of delivering actual tangible cuts for people that would impact their daily lives trying to get around for work and for pleasure and leisure, especially going into the summer season?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think we can all agree in this House that global inflation, rising interest rates, they have caused grocery prices to go up and made things expensive in right across the country, actually. And so we knew that. And so for Budget 24, we made things more affordable for people by taking action at the root causes. You know, we're putting hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars back into people's pockets in this province so that they can deal with the affordability of groceries. They can deal with things like childcare. I mean, we're giving $500 more to families on family bonus, something they've never done. You know, we're giving people breaks on their electricity. We're giving breaks on ICBC. But let's remind everybody what the current leader of the BCUP did. He hiked ICBC rates by 11%, and they also hiked MSP. They used MSP as their own little bank account. You know, they put tolls on bridges.
Members, hold it. Minister will continue.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker. I mean, they don't like to hear about these facts, but you know, he gave tax breaks to the biggest corporations in the province, where we've actually given tax. We have made them pay taxes because we know how incredibly important it is. And you know,
Members.
Now, one of the other things they don't like to talk about is, since we came into government, over 120,000 women have returned to the workforce. Mr. Speaker, that's a lot of them would say it's directly attributable to our childcare program, something that they actually cut when they came into government in 2001. So I just could go on and on, Mr. Speaker, and I get in the, but I just want to say that I know this government is committed to people in this province. We're committed to making sure we're not going to raise their taxes, and we are not going to make cuts to services.
House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For years, this government has talked in circles around the important issue of protecting old-growth forests. This is more of what he says than what he does, Mr. Speaker. In his first 100 days, the Premier committed to protecting old growth and prioritizing biodiversity and ecosystem health. Yet another legislative session has come and gone without any nod to old-growth forests. The old-growth strategic review is very clear on what is needed to protect the high-productivity old-growth forests. British Columbians have also been loud and clear. 92% of the population want some protection for old-growth trees. Meanwhile, big trees continue to fall under this government, making the province more susceptible to climate change and biodiversity loss. To the Premier, Mr. Speaker, after 4 years of promises and commitments to protecting old growth, where are we now?
Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. BC, under this government, has taken more concrete steps to protect old-growth forests and ecosystems in general than we have ever seen in British Columbia. There were many short-sighted approaches in the past, decisions to boost raw log exports that led us to the challenges we're facing today. We're working in partnership with First Nations, Mr. Speaker, with communities, with people in the sector, and we are conserving more ancient forests for our children and grandchildren and supporting a transition to more sustainable forestry jobs for workers and communities. We're implementing the recommendations of the Old Growth Strategic Review. We launched a $300 million partnership with, or a $300 million First Nations Conservation Fund in partnerships with the BC Parks Foundation to help protect more rare forests. And on that announcement, Mr. Speaker, Ken Wu, the Executive Director of the Endangered Ecosystems Alliance, said, Premier Eby has delivered. This is a huge conservation victory for the many thousands of people who've spoken up for years for this.
Thank you, ma'am. Member supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our forests in our province are burning. We get the Minister of Environment standing up and answering questions on forestry questions, the same Minister of Environment that failed to bring in species at risk legislation, the same Environment Minister that failed to bring in biodiversity legislation for the last 7 years that he's been in the Environment Minister. Old growth forests are crucial habitat for many plants and animals, Mr. Speaker, including the spotted owl and mountain caribou. They're culturally significant for many First Nations which harvest food and medicines from forests that we've stewarded for millennia, Mr. Speaker. They're a major draw for tourists who come from all over the world to marvel at these towering trees and their magnificence. But decades of industrial logging have taken an immense toll on the ecosystems and communities, and this government's response is rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. More trees are falling. In fact, the volume of old growth increased in recent years. The volume of old growth cut. Indigenous leaders and conservation groups are demanding the government protect more old growth trees. In the words of Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, at this rate, there will be nothing left for our children. Stop putting profit and votes over people. Stop logging our old growth trees. End quote. My question is again to the Premier or the Minister of Forests, when will his government fully fund the deferral process and provide compensation to First Nations who lose revenue as a result of the deferrals?
Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, the member is simply incorrect. This government has taken more action on a number of fronts to protect old-growth forests, biodiversity, ecosystems, endangered species than we've seen in British Columbia. We formed partnership agreements to protect the southern mountain caribou with nations in the northeast of the province and with the federal government. We took measures to protect spotted owls, including the captive breeding program. We have a process in place where we are systematically working with First Nations to protect the ancient trees, ancient forests, irreplaceable old growth, and yes, we are also supporting a healthy logging industry. Mr. Speaker, we are working to conserve ecosystems. We are putting ecosystem health at the center of the Forest Act, which was never done before, never the practice before, and along with the federal government and private sector partners, we have established $1 billion for conservation of ecosystems, species, and irreplaceable old-growth forests in this province. We'll continue our work. I just wish the member was paying attention.
Leader of the Fourth Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So here we are again with forest fires raging in this province of British Columbia. And you would think that after years, they would have learned some lessons. Mr. Speaker, up in Fort Nelson, when the fire started up there were crews there ready to go. Matter of fact, Terry, the president of Fire and Flood, tells me his team was ready to attack the fire when it was only just a minor issue. And this NDP government chose to sit on its hands and not deploy these crews and just let it burn and burn and burn. Now, of course, this crew is off. The crew that was there has already left for Alberta. They've got other things they're doing in Alberta. But the real question, Mr. Speaker, is through you to the Premier. Why were all the resources not applied that were available? Why were crews that were there ready to put out that fire not made available, not put in there, and let that fire actually build to the place now where we have a potential serious disaster on its hands?
Minister of Emergency Management.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. What is happening to the community up in Fort Nelson, I know all of our hearts and thoughts are with them. Nearly 5,000 people have been evacuated over the last several days, and we're incredibly grateful to the host communities that have accepted them, Prince George, Fort St. John, Chetwynd, and Dawson Creek as well. We're incredibly grateful for the BC Wildfire Service responders and the local fire departments who are continuing to fight the fire right now. We're actually quite fortunate that we had so many resources up there in Fort Nelson in the north so early on in the year. Largely, they were staging up because of the holdover fires up north. The Parker Lake fire was not a holdover fire, it was a new fire, and we were able to divert those resources up north directly to Parker Lake fire to hold it back immediately. We are continuing to deploy resources up there in the days ahead, and I know that we're all hoping for the best for that community.
Member supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The challenge here is that the initial attack was not done properly. We did not pull the resources in. When you've got a company like Fire and Flood Emergency Management Services that have cutting-edge equipment, cutting-edge water delivery systems to be able to attack fires that are not being deployed, that, quite frankly, is just incompetence. But it's not, it's a pattern that's happened year after year after year by this government. Matter of fact, this very same company was sitting in Kamloops, ready to be deployed last year on fires in Kelowna, being paid $40,000 a day and not being deployed. Not even being asked to go to work, just being paid to sit there. This government has once again ignored the reality of getting crews in quickly, private sector crews, local crews, getting them in to attack the fires. So the question once again to you, to the Premier, through you, Mr. Speaker, is this. When will this government actually learn lessons from what the mistakes have been made in the past years? When will they learn that they need to get their crews in there quickly, they need to use locals to be able to attack these things so that we're not in a situation where we have to evacuate a community like Fort Nelson?
Minister of Emergency Management.
Mr. Speaker, I reject the characterization being put forward by the leader of the fourth party. BC Wildfire Service crews were in the area. They were in Fort Nelson and they were able to deploy very quickly. We have substantial resources in the area. We have air tankers, we have helicopters, aerial resources, we've got ground crews with heavy equipment. They are doing their utmost. I'm incredibly grateful to the servicemen and women of the BC Wildfire Service and the firefighters, the local fire departments who are in the area right now deploying structural protection to save the community.
Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, 7 years ago, the NDP made affordability their signature election promise. They did it again in the election 4 years ago. 18 months ago, the Premier promised British Columbians when it comes to affordability, they would be able to feel and see and experience results on that front. But for many British Columbians like Leslie, who's a senior, who's on the brink of homelessness, these NDP promises ring hollow. She describes her reality, and I quote, "I never buy meat anymore. I live on salad and cottage cheese. The price of groceries is ridiculous," end quote. The NDP promises also ring hollow for Glenna, who's grappling with soaring grocery bills. She says, and I quote, "It's insane. I'm a single mom of a 2-year-old, and my weekly grocery bill is hundreds of dollars more today than it used to be. I come home with a box of diapers and wipes and food for my toddler while I eat frozen dinners. It's absolutely ridiculous," end quote. Mr. Speaker, while Glenna is forced to live on frozen dinners just to make ends meet, management consultants dine out on $1 billion from this NDP government. BC United will remove the carbon tax on farm protection, and we will eliminate the fuel tax of up to 15 cents per litre, all of which will help to lower the cost of groceries. So my question to the Premier is this. Why is the Premier wasting millions of dollars on a jam-packed Premier's office and $1 billion on consultants instead of adopting BC United's practical solutions that would give people like Leslie and Glenna the break that they deserve and that they need when it comes to groceries costs?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And no doubt the challenges that are being faced with global inflation and high interest rates are having a disproportionate impact on seniors. Honourable Speaker, one of the biggest pressures that seniors are facing in the communities across British Columbia, across the country, is the cost of housing. Housing is central to the challenges seniors facing, when I talk to the seniors advocate or different seniors organizations, Honourable Speaker. That's why we have the largest investment in affordable housing for seniors and for other people who are struggling in our communities since history, Honourable Speaker. One of the largest in province's history. In fact, the largest in the country Honourable Speaker. We know that for 2 decades there were not enough investments being made in affordable housing. We've dramatically increased that. That's why we also expanded SAFER to ensure that seniors had access to that, more seniors had access to those dollars, Honourable Speaker. We know this is important. We respect that people who've worked their entire lives, contributed so much, need to have those supports, and we're committed to continue to support them during these challenging times.
Kelowna Mission.
Housing? The minister stands up and brags about housing in BC, where we have the highest cost of housing in North America, highest rents in the country, and he's bragging about those results. Look, newsflash to this NDP government, across BC, people are struggling to make ends meet. This is the reality for Anita Lau, and I quote, "It's spend less, eat less, socialize less. We just try to survive," end quote. BC United has a plan to cut the cost of living, scrap the carbon tax on home heating, eliminate fuel tax, and actually restore the dream of home ownership by reducing taxes and doing a rent-to-own plan. Meanwhile, this NDP's lack of plan involves wasting $1 billion on management consultants while bragging about their housing strategies. This is exactly why Anita and countless others don't see any relief from this government, this premier, or that minister. How much longer will the premier ignore the cries for help from people like Anita, continuing to funnel funds to consultants rather than supporting those who desperately need relief?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we know that our population is aging in BC, and so we have taken action to support seniors and give them the support they need to live vibrant and independent lives. You know, we're helping more seniors stay in their own homes longer. We've put in $354 million over 3 years to strengthen home and community care for seniors, because I have never met a senior who said, "I just can't wait to get into the seniors facility." They want to stay in their own home. So we want to give them the support to make sure they can stay in their own homes longer. You know, we've also given more access to home support workers, healthcare workers, people like physiotherapists and occupational therapists who are helping seniors to stay mobile, stay in their homes, and more help with day-to-day activities like grocery shopping, you know, rides to appointments, making sure seniors get those supports. We're actually building more seniors facilities as well in many communities like Abbotsford, Richmond, Nanaimo, and we're helping seniors with costs because they're also getting the electricity affordability credit, they're getting the climate action tax credit boost, and the new renters tax credit. And for those that are still driving, they're getting, you know, flat rates on ICBC, which they will continue to get. You know, we want to make sure that we're supporting people. Doesn't matter whether they're young people, middle income, whether they're seniors. We want to make sure that we have those affordability credits in place for people, and that's what we're going to continue to do in this province.
The bell ends the question period.